Okay, so get this. Have you ever heard of a war that lasted for centuries, but had zero battles? No soldiers, no casualties, nothing. It sounds completely made up, right? Well, it might just be one of the weirdest stories in all of military history. We're diving into the bizarre, totally bloodless, and pretty much forgotten story of the 335-year war. Yeah, you heard that right. 335 years. To give you some perspective, this so-called war started before the Great Plague of London and didn't officially end until after the very first space shuttle took off. That is a massive stretch of time. And here's where it gets even crazier. In all that time, not a single shot was fired. Not one. No battles, no injuries, absolutely zero casualties on either side. It was a completely bloodless war. How is that even a thing? Which of course leads to the big question, how on earth is that possible? I mean, how can you be at war for over 3 centuries and nobody even notices, let alone actually fights? Well, the answer is this fascinating, kind of messy mix of civil war, a bit of piracy, and some seriously forgotten paperwork. All right, to really get this, we have to go way back. This whole thing didn't start with some grand clash of empires. Nope. It was basically a forgotten footnote in a much, much bigger conflict, the English Civil War. It's this wild story of how a global superpower ended up technically at war with a tiny little group of islands. So, on one side of the ring, you've got the Dutch Republic, a huge naval and economic power back then. And in the other corner, the Isles of Scilly, this tiny little chain of islands just off the coast of England. I mean, the size difference is almost hilarious. It's like a heavyweight champion challenging a feather to a fight. So here's the backstory. It's 1651, and the English Civil War is pretty much wrapping up. Oliver Cromwell and his parliamentarian forces have basically cornered the Royalists, pushing them to the very edge of the kingdom. The Royalist navy has nowhere left to go, so they retreat to their last stronghold, the Isles of Scilly. So you're probably wondering, where do the Dutch fit into all this? Well, they were allied with the parliamentarians. You know, the winning side. The problem was, this rogue royalist fleet stuck on the Isles of Scilly had basically become pirates. They were just wrecking Dutch merchant ships left and right. So the Dutch were, understandably, pretty upset and wanted to be paid back for their losses. So, in response, the Netherlands doesn't mess around. They send a pretty intimidating figure, Lieutenant Admiral Martin Trump, with a whole fleet to the Isles of Scilly. His mission was crystal clear. Demand that these royalist pirates pay up for all the ships and cargo they'd stolen. And this is the moment it all happens. According to an account written at the time, when the royalists basically told him to get lost, Admiral Trump followed his orders and officially declared war. But here's the kicker. He didn't declare war on all of England. No, he declared war specifically on the troublesome Isles of Scilly. So, war is declared. You'd expect cannons and battles, right? But then, crickets. Nothing. Which brings us to the next big question in this whole saga. How did this become the forgotten conflict? Well, it's because the whole reason for the war just evaporated. Almost immediately, just 3 months after the Dutch declared war, the main parliamentarian fleet, led by Admiral Robert Blake, showed up and made the royalists on Scilly surrender. Just like that, the threat to Dutch ships was gone. Poof. So the Dutch fleet, seeing that their job was basically done for them, without firing a single shot, just turned around and sailed home. And this is what led to this incredibly bizarre situation. A war gets declared in 1651, but the reason for it disappears so fast that nobody bothers to officially end it until, wait for it, 1986. Just think about that for a second. The Dutch declared war on this tiny, specific part of another country. So when the main English Civil War ended and major peace treaties were signed between England and the Netherlands, this little declaration against the Isles of Scilly was just completely ignored. It was too small, too weird, and it just fell right through the cracks of history. So this war falls through the cracks and becomes little more than a local myth on the islands, and there it sits for centuries. Until one curious historian decides to do some digging and accidentally sets the stage for what you might call peace in our time. It really all started as this local legend, this story people on the islands told. Then, in 1986, a historian and the chairman of the local council, a guy named Roy Duncan, decides, hey, I wonder if that's true. So he writes a letter to the Dutch embassy in London. And you won't believe it, the embassy staff looked into it and confirmed he was right. no peace treaty was ever signed. So what do? They invite the Dutch ambassador to come to the islands and officially make peace. And that's exactly what happened. On April 17, 1986, the Dutch ambassador traveled to the Isles of Scilly, signed a peace treaty, and finally, brought the 335-year, zero-casualty war to an official close. And the whole event was just wonderfully absurd and lighthearted. The Dutch ambassador at the time, Rein Hoodie Copper, even joked about it. He said that the islanders must have lived in constant terror to know we could have attacked at any moment for the last 3 centuries. And you knew there had to be a but. Here's the final twist in this already strange story. After all of that fanfare, there's a pretty serious historical debate about whether this war was ever actually real to begin with. Yeah, this is the question historians are still kicking around. Was this a genuine, if completely forgotten state of war, or was it just a fantastic local legend that kind of spiraled out of control? And honestly, the arguments are pretty good on both sides. In the yes, it was a real war column, you've got that contemporary document that says war was declared. Can't ignore that. But the case against it is really strong too. First, did Admiral Trump even have the legal authority from his own government to declare war? Probably not. Second, can you even declare war on just one part of a country that isn't its own sovereign nation? And maybe the biggest point, wouldn't any lingering conflict have been totally wiped clean by the major peace treaty signed between England and the Netherlands just a few years later, in 1654? Some modern historians just dismiss the whole 1986 ceremony as a great PR coup for tourism on the islands. In the end, the official outcome of that 1986 peace treaty was something called status quo ante bellum. It's a fancy Latin phrase that basically means, let's just put things back to the way they were before the war started. And since literally nothing happened during the war, nothing at all had to change. And that really leaves us with a fascinating question to chew on, doesn't it? What actually makes a war real? Is it a formal declaration on a piece of paper? Do you need to have casualties and actual fighting? Or can a war become real simply because we decide to tell its story and acknowledge it, even if it takes 335 years to get around to it?